I'm talking with David Waskow, your Climate Change Program Director for Oxfam America, and you've just returned from Bonn. Give me kind of an overview of what you saw happening there at the World Climate Talks.
Well, the tone was quite constructive in a lot of ways. It was a lot calmer than Copenhagen, certainly. And I think even some of the post-Copenhagen turmoil has dissipated. And so countries were really working to try to find constructive paths forward. And that's not to say that the fundamental issues have gone away by any means. But there were areas where progress was being made, and I think countries were showing some flexibility. One of those had to do with climate finance, and there was some good progress and flexibility, I think, in terms of how to set up a fund, how to set up a global climate fund. And so parties were working constructively in that, trying to talk through what the various pieces of that puzzle would look like. And I think that's one of the things that we could look to Cancun for in terms of constructive outcomes when the next conference of the parties happens.
Now, that climate finance, that's for the longer term financing, correct?
That's right. They're aiming at setting up a fund that would be in place starting in 2013 or thereabouts, post-2012, that could really be a key channel for international climate finance, both for countries to be able to adapt to the impacts that they're facing and also be able to adopt low-carbon development pathways.
Before 2013, there was fast-track financing promised in Copenhagen. Have you seen that materializing?
Well, there have certainly been a lot of moves on the part of the developed countries to put fast start financing in place. And I think the United States, for example, has taken some steps forward in the President's budget request. We have yet to see what Congress will actually do with that. But there are also lots of questions. My colleagues from Oxfam in European countries have a lot of questions about that fast start finance, how much of it is just recycled development aid or other financing that's out there, and how much of it is really new and additional. And we have some concerns with the U.S. Pieces of the puzzle. The U.S. has made some important steps forward, but there are some questions about whether they're double counting money toward commitments, international commitments made on food security at the G8 on the one hand, and fast start finance commitments made at Copenhagen on the other. And so there really needs to be transparency so we can understand what this money actually is.
Who would provide that transparency? How would you get it?
Well, I think it starts with the administration, with the Obama administration and the State Department and the Treasury Department particularly. And they should be able to take what Congress is doing and what they've proposed and really lay it out in very clear terms so we understand what's new, what's additional, what's really climate and not something else like food security or water.
Okay. Well, there's still a governance issue. I've certainly heard from the last 2 weeks in Bonn, G77 leaders, others continuing to object that money's going through the established international financing institutions. They want it done differently. Can you just tell us a little bit about why they object so much to these international financing institutions like the World Bank?
Well, I think there's actually some progress on that front in the last couple of weeks at Bonn. I think that's one of the things that really could be pointed to as an area of constructive dialogue. And the U.S. is showing some flexibility. The U.S. wants to create a new fund. It has said it wants a new global climate fund. And I think is showing that in the last couple of weeks has really been saying that it wants to explore a number of options. For example, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS is an important model, an important precedent we've been pointing to for a while, and the U.S. is now saying that it thinks that's a useful model to look at and to think about as a way to go forward on climate finance too.
Okay. Well, there is a high-level expert group on finance that was set up and pursuant to the Copenhagen Accord, and they did report to the Bonn meeting this time around. They were looking at a whole variety of ways that a long-term climate aid might be funded, including things like taxes on international financial and travel transactions. They were carbon markets, direct government aid. Do you have any thoughts on what are practical long-term approaches to this?
Well, in terms of developing the long-term financing sources, we're really going to have to look at a lot of options, and we think that, in fact, you're going to have to bring together several options to put together the kind of package to really meet the needs that are out there. And we're talking about the 100 billion and even potentially upwards that the Copenhagen Accord has spoken of, both for adaptation and for emissions reductions.
And that's 100 billion every year we're talking about.
That's right. That's right. And clearly we can't draw it all out of taxpayer dollars, and so we need to look at a lot of innovative solutions. One of those is international transport, shipping and aviation, and we really do think there's some prospects there to find ways to put in place some emissions regimes that would also help in terms of generating finance, whether it's levies or cap and trade or something else. There are ways to do this, and we think it could be an important source. And then there's some other possibilities. Using what are called the special drawing rights, really technical term, at the IMF could be a way also to generate some finance.
Overall, you sound like you're fairly optimistic to looking forward to Cancun.
Well, I think there's a real opportunity for progress. It's not to say it'll be easy or come without a lot of work, but I think parties want to be constructive. They want to keep the process moving forward. Sort of like the old, comment about a bicycle. You got to keep the bike moving to keep it going forward. And so it's not that the fundamental issues have disappeared. It's not that those really tough questions that countries have been facing and made Copenhagen difficult have gone away. But I do think that Cancun can be a moment that the progress keeps being made and the bicycle keeps moving forward, and we can move toward the kind of agreement we ultimately need.
One other small complaint, well, it wasn't small to the people involved, one complaint that I heard was that the issues in this calmer tone, some are being put over to working groups and so on, and that some of the smaller countries and some of the NGOs feel that's a way to cut them out of the process. Did you hear any of that?
Well, there's always a to and fro in terms of what the process looks like and what the NGO engagement is. The high-level advisory group on climate finance, the panel that's sponsored by the Secretary General of the UN, held an open briefing. And I thought it was quite remarkable in a lot of ways because governments and NGOs and essentially anyone who was accredited to be there was sitting in the same room together without any distinction between them. And I was able to ask a question at the same, in the same room, in the same way that governments from India or the United States or what have you were able to. And I thought it was really a lesson. It was very productive. It was a very interesting session. I think everybody learned from what was happening in the room, and I think it was a really interesting lesson in how productive it can be, in fact, when it's an inclusive and open process. I think one of the things that we really saw at Bonn is that many countries are waiting on tenterhooks to see what the United States is going to do, what Congress is going to do. And when questions of fundamental differences among governments were talked about, one of the key ones was questions about where Congress is at. I can't tell you the number of times I was asked about where the process in the Senate is at, what the prospects are in the Senate, and I think that's still a key question for these negotiations. It's not to say that the United States couldn't move forward. I think there are ways it could move forward on its Copenhagen emissions pledge and on its finance pledges, even without legislation passed here, but it's obviously going to be much easier in the trust level. I think most importantly, the trust level in the negotiations really turn in a lot of ways on what Congress does and what the Senate does in the coming weeks specifically.
Well, David Waskow with Oxfam America, thanks for talking to us today.
Sure thing.